name is Nadia, and I come from a strict Muslim family. I'm 23 years old, with an older sister, Layla, who is 25. People often call me pretty, with my long black hair and wide brown eyes, but no amount of beauty could mask the darkness that lingered inside my home. My mother, Fatima, was the heart of our family, always kind and gentle, despite the storms that raged around us. But my father was the root of all the pain we carried. He never worked a day in his life. Instead, he used my mother's hard-earned money to fuel his habits. Alcohol, cigarettes, and who knows what else. He was a man consumed by his own anger, and he took it out on us every chance he got. My sister and I would huddle together in fear, listening to the violent crashes and cruel words he hurled at my mother when he came home drunk. He beat her often, and sometimes us too. His hands were rough, his words even rougher, and there were nights I thought we wouldn't make it out alive. I was never allowed to go to school. My father said it was because of the money, but deep down, I knew it was because he wanted to control us. He didn't care if I or Layla had dreams. To him, we were nothing more than burdens, shadows that filled the corners of the house he hated. Every night, I prayed to God. I didn't pray for happiness, because I didn't believe that was possible. I prayed for an escape, whether through death or some other means. I didn't care. I just wanted to leave this nightmare behind. My father was a monster, and the longer I stayed, the more hopeless I became. One night, after another brutal beating, I sat in my room, trembling. I could hear my mother crying in the next room, Layla trying to comfort her, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do, but anything had to be better than this. So, without telling anyone, I packed a small bag with whatever clothes I could find and snuck out of the house in the dead of night. I had nowhere to go, but a friend from my neighborhood, Aisha, had once told me that if I ever needed help, I could stay with her. She lived with her 2 brothers in a small apartment on the other side of the city. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place, and that was all I needed. The first few nights were terrifying. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid my father would find me. I had no money, no job, and no idea how I would survive. But Aisha and her brothers were kind. They helped me find a job at a small cafe, where I started working as a waitress. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was barely enough to survive. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of freedom. After a few weeks, I started saving what little money I could. My mother and sister were still stuck with my father, and the guilt of leaving them behind gnawed at me every day. I missed them terribly. I imagined them still enduring the same abuse, trapped in that hellish house with no escape. So, I made a plan to visit them. I gathered the money I had saved and bought a few gifts. Nothing extravagant, just small things that I knew would make them smile. A scarf for my mother, a bracelet for Layla. I hoped they would bring some joy, even if it was only temporary. The day I went back to visit them, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, anxiety, and a sliver of hope that things had somehow changed. But when I arrived, I could tell immediately that nothing had improved. My father was still the same man, and the tension in the house was thick. My mother greeted me with tears in her eyes, and Layla hugged me tightly, as if she never wanted to let go. I handed them the money I had saved, and the gifts, hoping it would ease their burden a little. They smiled, but their smiles were weighed down by years of pain. Suddenly, the front door swung open, and my father stumbled in. He reeked of alcohol, his clothes wrinkled and stained. His eyes landed on me, and for a moment, he just stared. Then, without warning, he started yelling. "I hate all of you," he shouted, his voice slurred but full of venom. "I've had enough of this miserable life. I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back." My heart pounded in my chest. Was he serious? He staggered closer, his breath thick with the stench of whiskey. "I've been having an affair for 6 months," he sneered, "and I'm going to marry her. She's younger, prettier, and she doesn't nag me like you useless women." I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air like a poison, choking the life out of the room. My mother collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Layla stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. And just like that, he was gone. He left us without a second glance, slamming the door behind him, as if we were nothing more than a bad memory. For a moment, I stood there in stunned silence, unable to process what had just happened. My father, the man who had terrorized us for years, was finally gone. But instead of relief, all I felt was emptiness. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. My mother was devastated, her heart shattered by the betrayal. She had endured years of abuse, hoping that one day things would change, that my father would become the man she had once loved. But now, all hope was gone. I tried to comfort her, but there was only so much I could do. The pain of losing him, even though he had been a monster, was overwhelming for her. Layla and I tried to keep the house together, but it was falling apart. Financially, emotionally, and in every way possible. We were still struggling with money. My father had left us with nothing, and my mother couldn't work as much as she used to. Her health had deteriorated from all the stress, and every day was a battle just to survive. I started working longer hours at the cafe, but it was never enough. Some days, I would skip meals just so we could have enough to eat for the week. Layla picked up odd jobs where she could, but it was a constant struggle. One night, as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about the woman my father had left us for. Who was she? Did she know the kind of man he was? Or did he hide that part of himself from her, the way he had hidden it from my mother in the early days of their marriage? I felt a surge of anger, not just at my father, but at the world. How could life be so unfair? How could a man like him get to leave while we were left to pick up the pieces of the life he had shattered? But I knew I couldn't stay angry forever. I had to do something. I had to find a way to take control of my life, to make sure my mother and Layla would never have to suffer like this again. I wasn't sure how, but I promised myself that I would find a way. I would work harder, save more, and maybe, just maybe, one day we could leave this life behind for good. I still remember the day my father walked out on us. At first, it felt like the end of everything, like the floor had been pulled out from under us, and we were tumbling into an endless abyss. But as time passed, we began to realize something important. It was also the beginning of a life without fear, without pain, a life where we could finally breathe. After he left, the house felt strange, quiet, almost too quiet. My mother, Layla, and I walked around like ghosts, unsure of what to do with this new sense of freedom. We had spent so long trying to survive the storm, We didn't know how to live in the calm that followed. But slowly, we began to heal. My mother, who had once been a shell of herself, started to come back to life. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her face, once marked with worry and sadness, began to soften. She smiled more, even laughed sometimes, though her laughter still carried the scars of years of abuse. One day, she told me something that shocked me. "Nadia, we were feeding the demon," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. "For so long, we gave your father the power to control us, to hurt us. But now, we don't have to anymore." It was a revelation. I had spent my whole life terrified of my father, trying to please him, trying to avoid his anger. But now, he was gone, and with him, the power he held over us. We were free, truly free, for the first time in our lives. But even as we healed, I carried a deep wound inside me. I was scared. Scared of men. Scared of relationships. Scared of repeating the cycle my mother had been trapped in. I wasn't interested in marriage or children. The thought of starting a family terrified me. Every time I saw a young couple holding hands, I felt a knot in my stomach. I couldn't shake the belief that all men were like my father, that they would lie, cheat, and abuse just like he did. I dated a few guys here and there, but it was never serious. I kept them at arm's length, afraid to let them get too close. The moment things started to feel too real, I'd pull back, ending the relationship before it even had a chance to start. I told myself it was better this way, safer. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I was living in constant fear, and it was exhausting. That's when Layla suggested therapy. At first, I was hesitant. Therapy? For me? It felt like admitting weakness, like I couldn't handle my own life. But Layla insisted. She had already started going herself, and said it was helping her process the trauma we had experienced. So, reluctantly, I agreed. Walking into that therapist's office for the first time felt like stepping into the unknown. My heart raced, my palms were sweaty, but there was a part of me, tiny but growing, that hoped this might help. The first few sessions were tough. I had to confront feelings I had buried deep inside, memories I wanted to forget. But my therapist, Dr. Amina, was patient and kind. She helped me understand that the fear I carried wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault that my father had abused us, and it wasn't my fault that I was scared of men now, but it was my responsibility to heal. One session in particular stands out in my memory. It was the day I finally realized that my father leaving us was the best thing that ever happened to us. Dr. Amina asked me to describe how I felt when he walked out of the door that final time. I told her about the fear, the confusion, the anger. But as I spoke, something shifted inside me. "I don't miss him," I said, the words coming out in a whisper. "I don't miss him at all." It was the first time I had said it out loud, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I realized in that moment that I was done being a victim. I was done letting the memory of my father control my life. Dr. Amina smiled softly. "Nadia, you're free now. It's okay to let go." From that day forward, everything changed. I started to see the world differently. I realized that I didn't have to be afraid anymore. My father was gone, and he wasn't coming back. He couldn't hurt us anymore. I also started to take better care of myself. I stopped feeling guilty for wanting things, for wanting a life that was different from the one I had known. I began to put myself first, something I had never done before. I stopped worrying about pleasing others and started thinking about what I asked. My mother, too, was healing. She had spent so many years living in fear, constantly sacrificing herself for my father. But now she was starting to see that she deserved happiness. She no longer had to carry the burden of supporting the family alone. I had a job now, and so did Layla, and together we were able to take care of her. The more we talked about it, the more we realized how much we had been feeding the demon, how much we had allowed my father to take from us. But now, we were done. We weren't going to let him control us anymore. We were done feeding the demon. There was a sense of empowerment in that realization. It was like we had taken our lives back, piece by piece. My mother started going out more, meeting friends, and doing things she enjoyed. Layla and I supported her every step of the way, and we started to feel like a family again, one that wasn't broken. As time passed, young men continued to show interest in me, but I was always cautious. I had learned to protect my heart, but I wasn't closing myself off anymore. Therapy helped me understand that not all men were like my father. It would take time, but I knew that I could build relationships based on trust and respect instead of fear. One day, I met a man named Omar. He was different from the others, kind, patient, and understanding of my past. We talked for hours about everything, our lives, our dreams, our fears. For the first time, I felt like I could trust someone, like I could let someone in without being afraid. But I wasn't in a rush. I knew that healing took time, and I wanted to make sure I was ready before diving into anything serious. Omar respected that, and he never pushed me to move faster than I was comfortable with. For the first time, I realized that not all men were like my father. There were good men out there, men who could love and respect me for who I was. As for my mother, she began to thrive in ways I had never seen before. She started her own small business, selling handmade crafts, and she was doing well. She was finally living the life she deserved, and seeing her happiness filled me with hope. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were ours now. No one was controlling us. No one was abusing us. We had stopped feeding the demon, and we had become stronger because of it. As I continued therapy, I opened up more about the scars I carried, not just from my father's abuse, but from the way I had seen the world for so long. I used to think that life was something that happened asterisk to asterisk me, that I had no control, that I was destined to suffer because of what my father had done to us. But slowly, my therapist, Dr. Amina, helped me realize that I wasn't a victim anymore. I had the power to decide what my future would look like. One of the most important lessons she taught me was that I had a choice, to either get better or stay bitter. It was a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. "Nadia," she said during one of our sessions, "you've been through so much pain, and it's natural to feel angry about it, but holding on to that anger will only hurt you more. You can choose to let it consume you, or you can choose to heal. You can get better, or you can stay bitter. The choice is yours." I thought about her words for days. Stay bitter or get better. I had every reason to stay angry at my father, at the world, at the life I had been dealt. But what good would that do? It wouldn't change the past, and it certainly wouldn't make me happy. I realized that by holding on to bitterness, I was giving my father even more power over me, even though he was no longer in my life. So I decided to choose better. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward. I began to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the fear that had followed me for so long. I started focusing on the things I could control, my healing, my happiness, and my future. One of the ways I began to heal was by strengthening my faith. Dr. Amina encouraged me to reconnect with my spirituality, and I started talking to God again. Not in the way I had before, where I begged for escape or prayed for the suffering to end. This time I talked to God like I was having a conversation with a friend. I told him about my hopes, my fears, and my dreams for the future. Strangely, as I began to open up in prayer, little coincidences started happening in my life. Things that felt too perfectly timed to be accidents. It was as if the universe was listening, guiding me in ways I couldn't fully explain. One of those coincidences was Omar. I first met Omar at a cafe, completely by chance. He was sitting at the table next to mine, and we struck up a conversation over something trivial. Maybe it was about the weather or the music playing in the background. But there was something about him that immediately put me at ease. He had a gentle presence, a warmth that made me feel safe, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the weeks that followed, I kept bumping into him, at the grocery store, at the park, even at the mosque. It was as if the universe was throwing us together. At first, I dismissed it as mere coincidence, but Dr. Amina encouraged me to think of it differently. "These are signs," she said with a soft smile during one of our sessions. "The universe works in mysterious ways. Sometimes when we open ourselves up to possibilities, life presents us with opportunities we didn't expect. Pay attention to these moments, Nadia. They're guiding you." And so, I began to pay attention. Each time I saw Omar, I felt a little spark of something, a connection I couldn't quite describe. We started talking more, and our conversations became deeper. He shared stories about his family, his passions, and his dreams, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else. We flirted, but it was always light and playful, never rushed or forced. Omar had a way of making me feel seen, truly seen. He didn't just look at me as someone with a painful past. He saw the person I was becoming, and that made all the difference. One night, after one of our long talks, I told him about my father, about the abuse, the fear, the scars that had shaped me. I expected him to pull away, to see me as damaged or broken. But instead, he listened. He didn't judge or try to fix me. He simply held space for my pain, and in doing so, he helped me begin to let it go. It was in moments like these that I realized how wrong I had been about men. Not all men were like my father. Omar was different, gentle, kind, and patient. He didn't want to control me or take anything from me. He just wanted to be with me. As our relationship grew, I continued my therapy, and each session with Dr. Amina was like peeling back another layer of my past. We talked about how to recognize signs from the universe, those little nudges that guide us toward what's meant for us. She taught me that sometimes the universe speaks to us through people, through experiences, through coincidences that feel too meaningful to ignore. But healing wasn't just about recognizing signs or meeting the right person. It was also about learning how to deal with insecurity and fear when they crept back in. "You are not a victim," Dr. Amina would remind me, time and time again. "You have survived, and now you are thriving. When someone makes you feel insecure, remind yourself of how far you've come. You are stronger than your past." She helped me understand that when people try to bring us down, whether through words or actions, it's often a reflection of their own insecurities, not ours. "Their opinions don't define you," she said firmly. "You define you." That was another turning point for me. I realized that I had spent so long allowing others to shape my identity, first my father, and then the men I had dated before Omar. But I was done with that. I was done letting anyone else tell me who I was or what I was worth. With each session, I grew stronger. I learned how to let go of the past, not by forgetting it, but by reframing it. My past had shaped me, yes, but it didn't control me. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I chose to move forward. Omar and I grew closer with each passing day, and the little coincidences continued. He would show up just when I needed him, or say something that echoed a thought I had been too afraid to voice. It felt like the universe was conspiring to bring us together, and for once, I wasn't scared. We flirted more openly now, teasing each other about silly things. But there was always an underlying tenderness between us. We hadn't rushed into anything physical. I was still healing, and Omar understood that. He never pressured me or made me feel like I had to be anything other than myself. One day, after we had spent hours talking under the stars, Omar looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Nadia," he said softly, "I love who you are. not just the person you're becoming, but the person you've always been. You're stronger than you know. In that moment, I felt something inside me shift. I realized that I had finally found someone who loved me for me, not despite my past, but because of it. Omar saw the whole of me, and he accepted it. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I had let go of the bitterness, the fear, and the insecurity that had haunted me for so long. I had stopped feeding the demons of my past, and in doing so, I had found love, not just with Omar, but with myself. The story of my life wasn't over, but I had finally taken control of it. I had learned to listen to the signs, to trust in the universe, and to believe that I deserved happiness. And in doing so, I had found the greatest gift of all, freedom. And with that, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. Because I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor. I was free.